In the forgotten town of Havenwood, dust settled on everything but the secrets. For Maya, the dust was a shield, a layer of comfortable obscurity she polished every day, along with the chrome napkin dispensers at the Crossroads diner. For 5 years, she'd been a ghost in a waitress uniform, serving coffee and cherry pie with a practiced, empty smile. Her life was a loop of predictable rhythms, the 5 a.m. sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the low murmur of local gossip, and the final lockup at dusk. But every night, in the silence of her small apartment above the town's closed-down hardware store, another ritual took place. Beneath a loose floorboard in her closet, wrapped in oilcloth, was the only thing that truly belonged to her. It wasn't a keepsake or a photograph. It was a Sig Sauer P26, its steel frame cold and heavy with memory. The slide was custom-milled, the grip textured with a pattern that existed on no other firearm in the world. Its serial number was a ghost, registered to a man who had been dead for 5 years. Each night, she would disassemble it, her hands moving with a fluid, terrifying muscle memory that had nothing to do with balancing plates. She would clean each component, not with care, but with a cold, methodical precision, as if performing an autopsy on her own past. The gun was her secret. The gun was a death sentence. And in a town like Havenwood, it was the one thing she believed would keep her safe. The town's rhythm broke on a Tuesday. The bell above the diner door chimed, announcing a customer who didn't belong. He wasn't a trucker passing through or a lost tourist. He was tall, dressed in a simple dark Henley, and worn jeans that did nothing to hide a physique built from discipline, not vanity. He was perhaps 40, with a face that was handsome in a severe way, etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. But it was his eyes that made the coffee pot in Maya's hand feel slick with sweat. They were a piercing, intelligent grey, and they didn't just look at the room. They scanned it, catalogued it, assessed it. They saw the faded linoleum, the cracked vinyl on the booths, the slight tremor in old Mr. Henderson's hand. And then they settled on her. He took a seat at the counter, not in the center, but at the end, a position that gave him a clear view of the door and the kitchen pass-through. He didn't look at the menu. "Coffee," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the diner's morning chatter. "Black." Maya poured the coffee, her movements smooth, practiced, betraying none of the frantic alarm bells screaming in her head. She had spent 5 years becoming invisible, mastering the art of being overlooked. But this man saw her. He saw the way she stood, balanced on the balls of her feet. He saw the way her eyes flickered to the door when the bell chimed, a microsecond before her head turned. He saw the waitress, but he was looking for the soldier. "Passing through?" she asked, her voice the perfect blend of polite and disinterested. "Something like that," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Looking for something. Sometimes you find the most interesting things in the quietest places." He didn't say another word, just drank his coffee and watched. For the next hour, Maya felt his eyes on her like a physical weight. She could feel him analyzing her efficiency, her economy of motion, the way she diffused a budding argument between 2 farmers over a property line without raising her voice. Sheriff Brody came in for his morning donut, gave the stranger a long, hard look, and then gave Maya a subtle nod that said, "I see him too." When the man finally stood to leave, he placed a $20 bill on the counter for a $2 coffee. But he didn't just leave it flat. He'd folded it. It was a small, intricate origami bird. A crane. Maya's blood ran cold. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just any fold. It was a specific crease pattern, a silent calling card used in another life, in another world, a signal between operatives who lived and died in the shadows. It meant one thing: I know who you are. The origami crane sat on the counter, a paper threat more potent than any weapon. For the rest of the day, Maya moved in a fog of controlled panic. Who was he? How had he found her? After 5 years of absolute silence, of burying a past so deep she had almost convinced herself it was a nightmare, the nightmare had walked into her diner and ordered a coffee. That night, the Sig Sauer felt different in her hands. It was no longer a relic of a buried life. It was a tool waiting to be used. The deadly secret she had been hiding was no longer just a memory. It was a loaded gun, and a stranger had just put his finger on the trigger. He returned the next day, and the day after that. He introduced himself as Julian Croft. He claimed he was a developer, scouting locations for a new luxury retreat, a ridiculous lie in a town whose main industry was slow decay. He became a fixture at the counter, a quiet, unnerving presence. He spoke little, but his questions were like surgical probes, designed to slip past her defenses. He asked about where she was from, and she gave him the vague, rehearsed story of a small town in the Midwest that didn't exist. He asked what she did before Havenwood, and she spoke of other waitressing jobs, a life of quiet mediocrity she had meticulously documented with fake pay stubs and forged references. He would listen, his grey eyes betraying nothing, and then he would ask something sharp, something out of place. "Ever handle anything heavier than a coffee pot?" he'd asked once, his voice casual. "You have a steady hand." "Comes from not spilling soup on the customers," she'd replied with a tight smile. Sheriff Brody watched their interactions with growing suspicion. He was a good man, a small-town cop with instincts honed by decades of dealing with the quiet desperation that festered in forgotten places. "He's not right, Maya," Brody warned her one afternoon, his voice low. "Ran his name, Julian Croft. Man's a ghost. No records, no credit history, nothing. The car he drives is registered to a shell corporation in Delaware that owns nothing but the vehicle. A man with that much money and no footprint is a man who's hiding something. Maybe he just values his privacy," Maya said, her own words tasting like ash. "Privacy is a locked door," Brody countered, his eyes hard. "Anonymity is a concrete bunker. That man is living in a bunker. You be careful." The warning was unnecessary. Maya was already on high alert. Every night she ran drills in her apartment, her bare feet silent on the floorboards, moving through the small space, clearing corners, checking sight lines. She mapped escape routes from the diner, from her apartment, from the town itself. The quiet life she had built was a cage, and she was suddenly, terrifyingly aware of the bars. The third day, Croft changed tactics. He was talking to Marge, the diner's owner, a warm, bustling woman who had taken Maya under her wing 5 years ago. He was charming, laughing at Marge's stories about her prize-winning pies. Then, as Maya approached to refill his coffee, he glanced at the small television mounted in the corner of the diner. A national news network was running a retrospective piece. And it was 5 years ago today that philanthropist and tech mogul Alistair Finch was assassinated in his penthouse suite, the reporter's voice droned. The brazen attack sent shock waves through the financial world, while a suspect, ex-military contractor, Daniel Rosen, was identified. He was killed during a standoff with federal agents before he could be brought to trial. The case was officially closed, but to this day, conspiracy theories abound. The screen showed a grainy security image of a shadowy figure on a rooftop, and then a photo of the dead contractor, Daniel Rosen. Maya's hand didn't shake as she poured the coffee. Her expression didn't change, but inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. She felt Croft's eyes leave the television and fix on her, searching for a flicker, a crack in the facade. She gave him nothing. "Tragic," Croft said, his voice laced with a strange, analytical coldness. "A man like that, taken out, takes a certain kind of person to do that. Someone with a very particular set of skills." The words hung in the air, a direct echo of the life she'd fled. She simply nodded, collected the empty sugar shakers from his section of the counter, and walked away. But she knew, with chilling certainty, that this was not a coincidence. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to force the ghost out of the machine. His final test came on a Friday night, during the dinner rush. The diner was packed. Maya was moving like a blur, taking orders, delivering plates, a whirlwind of efficiency. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from a booth in the back. Two men, rough-looking types she'd never seen before, were shouting at each other, their voices escalating into threats. One of them knocked a table over. Plates shattered. A woman screamed. Sheriff Brody wasn't on duty. The town's only other deputy was miles away on a call. The diner patrons froze, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity on their faces. Marge ducked behind the counter, reaching for the phone. But Maya moved. She didn't run towards the fight. She moved towards the periphery, her path a calculated arc that kept her out of their direct line of sight, while positioning her between them and the other customers. Her mind, once filled with dinner orders, was now a cold, clear stream of tactical data. Exit blocked by the larger man. Smaller one is erratic, unpredictable. Improvised weapon, heavy glass ketchup bottle on the adjacent table. "Hey, take it outside!" a farmer shouted nervously. The larger man laughed, a nasty, brutish sound. "Or what, old man? You gonna stop us?" He shoved the smaller man, who stumbled back against the jukebox. That was the moment. The smaller man was off balance, the larger one overconfident. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't draw attention to herself. She picked up a tray laden with dirty dishes and, in one smooth, deceptively casual motion, tripped. The tray flew from her hands. A steak knife, slick with grease, spun through the air and clattered to the floor right behind the larger man's heels. At the same time, a heavy water pitcher from the tray crashed into the side of the jukebox, making a sound like a gunshot. The larger man flinched at the sound and instinctively stepped back from the perceived threat, his heel landing directly on the flat of the slick knife. His feet went out from under him, and all 300 pounds of him crashed to the floor with a grunt that shook the building. The smaller man, startled by the chaos, froze for a critical second. It was all Maya needed. She was already moving, grabbing the smaller man's arm, not with a waitress's grip, but with a steel-fingered hold that targeted the pressure point below his elbow. A jolt of pure agony shot up his arm. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "The door is that way," Maya said, her voice a low, calm whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You have 3 seconds to be on the other side of it." She released him. The man, cradling his arm, scrambled to his feet. He helped his groaning partner up, and the two of them stumbled out of the diner, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The entire incident had taken less than 10 seconds. Maya calmly began picking up the broken plates, her face a mask of flustered apology. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, Marge," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I'm so clumsy. I can't believe I did that." The patrons, buzzing with adrenaline, saw a waitress who had accidentally, miraculously, ended a dangerous situation. But Julian Croft, sitting at the counter, saw something else entirely. He hadn't moved a muscle during the entire event. He had watched her every move, his expression unreadable. He saw the calculated trajectory of the tray. He saw the precise placement of the knife. He saw the professional, pain compliance hold. He saw a weapon, perfectly disguised as a waitress. As the diner slowly returned to normal, Croft paid his bill and stood to leave. He paused beside her as she wiped down a table. "That was quite a spill," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm just glad no one got hurt," she replied, not looking at him. "Some people," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "spend their whole lives learning to be that clumsy. They train for it, in places most people have never heard of." He placed a $100 bill on the table. "For the damages." He walked out, the bell above the door chiming his departure. Maya stood frozen, the damp rag in her hand. The trap had been sprung. Her cover was blown. She knew he wouldn't be coming back to the diner. The next time they met, it would be on his terms. And there would be no more questions. The confrontation came 2 nights later. She felt it before it happened, a hum of wrongness in the quiet Havenwood night. The streetlights seemed too bright, the shadows too deep. After locking up the diner, she didn't walk home via her usual route. She slipped through the back alley, her senses on fire, every scuttling rat, every gust of wind registering as a potential threat. Her apartment building was dark, silent. Too silent. She took the fire escape, her sneakers making no sound on the rusted metal. She didn't enter through her window but climbed to the roof, listening. She heard nothing, which was the most dangerous sound of all. From her pocket, she pulled a small, high-tension wire and, after a moment's work, slipped the lock on the roof access door. She moved down through the building's dusty attic, a ghost in her own home. He was waiting for her, sitting in the single armchair in her small living room as if he'd been invited. He hadn't forced the door. The locks were untouched. He'd simply defeated them, as she knew he would. He wasn't armed, or at least no weapon was visible. He just sat there, a predator at rest, the faint glow of a street lamp painting stripes across his face. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming," Julian Croft said. His voice was calm, conversational. Maya didn't answer. She remained in the shadows of the hallway, her body coiled like a spring. The show at the diner was impressive, a little theatrical for my taste, but effective. "Get out of my apartment," she said, her voice low and hard, all traces of the cheerful waitress gone. "I don't think so," he said, not moving. "We have something to discuss. About Alistair Finch, about the weapon used to kill him. A custom SIG, Sauer PR-26, a weapon so unique, the shell casings it ejected were like a fingerprint that led to a dead man named Daniel Rosen." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The only problem is, Rosen was a patsy, a fall guy. He was a good soldier, but he wasn't a ghost. The person who made that shot from a rooftop over 1,000 yards away in high winds, that person was a ghost who disappeared right after the job was done." Maya's blood turned to ice. He knew everything. "I've been looking for that ghost for 5 years, Croft continued, his voice taking on a raw personal edge. "Not for revenge, not for justice, at least not the kind you think." He finally stood, moving out of the shadows and into the dim light. The severity in his face was gone, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. Alistair Finch was a traitor. He was selling classified intelligence that got dozens of good people killed, people I served with, people I cared about. His official assassination was a cover. The real mission was a sanctioned black op to stop him before he could do more damage. Maya remained silent, her mind racing. This was a trick, a lie designed to get her to confess. "I don't care that you killed him," Croft said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "In fact, I'm grateful. But the people who sanctioned the hit needed a scapegoat to keep their hands clean. They chose Daniel Rosin, and when he was conveniently killed in a standoff, they chose someone else to take his place." He took a step closer. "My best friend, Commander Evan Reed. He was part of my SEAL team. They framed him for being Rosine's accomplice. They buried him in a black site prison. No trial, no record, just a man erased from the world. He's been there for 5 years." The world tilted under Maya's feet. This wasn't what she had expected. The story she knew, the one she had run from, was that she had been a tool for a corrupt faction, that Finch's death was an illegal hit, and Rosin was an innocent man silenced to cover their tracks. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. "Because the only thing that can prove Evan is innocent is the same thing that proves you're guilty," Croft said, his grey eyes locking onto hers with desperate intensity. "The gun, the ballistics report on those shell casings was buried, but I have a copy. The unique rifling marks from that barrel are the only physical evidence that links the real shooter to the scene. If I can produce that weapon, I can prove the official story is a lie. I can force them to reopen the case. I can get my friend out." He stopped just feet from her. "I know you have it. A professional like you never discards a tool that perfect. You're not here to arrest me." "I'm not a cop," he said with a bitter laugh. "I'm just a man trying to save his friend. I will give you anything. A new identity, money, a plane to anywhere in the world. All I need is the gun." For the first time in 5 years, Maya felt something other than fear. A crack appeared in the wall of ice around her heart. A man's life was tangled up in her secret. An innocent man. Before she could process the monumental choice in front of her, a sound from the street below shattered the fragile moment. It was the subtle crunch of gravel under the tires of heavy vehicles moving with unnatural slowness. Then another. They were cutting their engines before they reached the building, coasting into position. Croft heard it too. The weariness in his face vanished, replaced by the lethal focus of the soldier he once was. "They followed me," he whispered, a look of cold fury in his eyes. Maya was already moving toward the window, peering through a slit in the blinds. 2 black, unmarked SUVs were parked across the street. Men in dark tactical gear were disembarking, moving with the fluid, silent efficiency of apex predators. They weren't police. They weren't federal agents. They were cleaners. "They're not here for you," Maya said, a grim realization dawning. "They're here for me. Someone else wants the gun buried. For good." A red laser dot appeared on the wall next to her head. Then another on Croft's chest. "Down!" he yelled, tackling her to the ground just as the windows of the apartment exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The air filled with the deafening percussive roar of suppressed automatic weapons fire, tearing through her small living room, shredding the life she had so carefully built. The quiet sanctuary of Havenwood had just become a war zone. Her secret was out, and the people she had run from had finally found her. Trapped with the one man who could expose her, she now had to trust him to survive. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of noise and motion. Splintered wood and razor-sharp shards of glass rained down on them. Croft's body was a dead weight, driving the air from Maya's lungs. But his action had saved their lives. The laser dots had vanished, replaced by the relentless, chewing sound of automatic fire, tearing her apartment to pieces. The floral-patterned sofa she'd bought at a thrift store disintegrated into a cloud of stuffing. The cheap laminate floorboards were ripped and gouged. "Stay down!" Croft yelled over the din, his voice a tight, professional bark. He rolled off her, drawing a compact pistol from the small of his back she hadn't seen. "How many?" Maya's mind was already a step ahead. The terrified waitress burned away by the cold fire of a trained operative. 2 shooters across the street, providing suppression. At least 4 more for the entry team. They'll breach in 10 seconds. She crawled on her belly, the floor slick with shattered glass, toward the closet. The gunfire paused, a terrifying silence that promised a new phase of the assault. The silence of men moving into position. "My gun is under the floorboard in the closet," she said, her voice devoid of panic. "No time!" Croft hissed, peering over the edge of the shredded sofa. "They're coming up the stairs." The heavy thud of tactical boots on the building's main staircase confirmed his words. Maya's mind flashed to the nightly drills, the endless, silent rehearsals in this very space. She had mapped every weakness, every possibility. The loose floorboard wasn't just a hiding place, it was an opportunity. "They're expecting us to go out the back or up to the roof," she said, her eyes scanning the room, seeing not a home but a tactical puzzle. "They won't expect us to go down." She scrambled to the center of the living room, to the spot where the floor sagged the most. It was the main support beam for the apartment, running the length of the building. But in an old structure like this, built over 100 years ago, the space between the floor joists was wide. "The hardware store below. It's been closed for 30 years. The ceiling is just plaster and lath." Croft understood immediately. It was insane. It was their only chance. He moved to cover the hallway leading to the front door. The first boot kicked the door, the wood groaning in protest. Maya didn't hesitate. She rose to a crouch, lifted her leg, and drove her heel down with every ounce of her strength onto the weakest point of the floor. The old wood splintered. She stomped again, a crack spider-webbing out. On the third stomp, the floor gave way with a deafening crack and a shower of plaster dust and splintered wood. A dark, cavernous space opened beneath them. The apartment door burst open. A black-clad figure filled the frame, rifle raised. Croft fired twice, the sound shockingly loud in the enclosed space. The figure dropped. "Go!" Croft yelled, laying down suppression fire into the hallway. Maya dropped through the hole without a second thought, landing in a crouch on something solid 10 feet below. The air was thick with the smell of rust, old oil, and decay. Dust, the very thing she had used as a shield for 5 years, now billowed around her, a welcome cloak of obscurity. She landed on the main sales counter of the abandoned hardware store. Croft followed a second later, landing beside her with a grunt. Above them, boots thudded on the remaining floorboards, and shouts echoed in the ruined apartment. Flashlight beams cut through the hole, slicing through the thick dust clouds. "This way," Maya whispered, her voice a ghost in the cavernous dark. She moved with a silent, terrifying familiarity, her feet finding paths through the debris-strewn aisles. This was her building. She knew its secrets. They navigated the labyrinth of decaying shelves, the skeletal remains of a forgotten time. Bags of concrete had hardened into stone monuments. Cans of paint had rusted through, leaving abstract patterns on the floor. The cleaners were coming down the main stairs now, their powerful lights cutting swaths through the gloom. Maya paused behind a tall shelf of nuts and bolts, her mind racing. She grabbed a handful of heavy hex nuts from a dusty bin. As 2 flashlight beams approached their aisle, she threw the nuts against a metal shelf far to their left. The sharp clatter echoed through the store, and the beams immediately swung toward the sound. Croft gave her a look of grudging admiration. They used the misdirection to slip into the back storeroom, a place even darker and more cluttered than the main floor. The air was cold, damp. "They'll sweep this whole building, grid by grid," Croft whispered, his breath pluming in the cold air. "We're still trapped." "No, we're not," Maya replied. She ran her hand along the cold brick of the back wall until her fingers found what she was looking for. The iron door of an old coal chute, long since sealed over. She had found it years ago, during one of her paranoid explorations of the building. It had taken her a month of quiet, nightly work to loosen the rusted hinges and clear a path. It groaned in protest as she pulled it open, the sound of grinding metal seeming to scream in the silence. It opened onto the narrow, trash-filled alley behind the building. Freedom! They slipped out into the cold night air just as they heard the cleaners breaching the storeroom door. They didn't run. They melted into the shadows, moving down the alley, putting distance between themselves and the hunters. They paused at the end of the alley, peering around the corner. The black SUVs were still there, men posted at every corner, a perimeter locking down the block. They were boxed in. "Now we're trapped," Croft said, his voice grim. Maya looked down the street, past the cordon. She could just see the warm, familiar glow of the Crossroads diner. Marge would have closed up hours ago. But Marge was a creature of habit. Every night, she left the key to the back door under a specific loose brick in the wall, a contingency in case she ever forgot her main set. Maya had watched her do it 1,000 times. "They're looking for a ghost and a soldier," Maya whispered. "They're expecting us to fight our way out. They're not looking for a waitress." She pulled her hair out of its tight bun, mussing it up. She smudged a streak of dirt across her cheek. In the dim light, the hard lines of the operative softened, replaced by the disheveled fear of a civilian caught in something she didn't understand. She took a deep breath, and when she looked at Croft, her eyes were wide with practiced terror. "Follow my lead," she said. "And for God's sake, try to look scared." She stumbled out of the alley, not running, but staggering, a hand pressed to her head as if she were dazed. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "Somebody help! There are men with guns in my apartment." One of the perimeter guards immediately turned, his rifle coming up. "Mom, get back in the alley. This is a secure area." Croft emerged behind her, hands raised, playing the part of the protective but terrified boyfriend. "Please, we live up there. We heard shooting." The guards were confused. Their targets were supposed to be inside the building, not walking out the front and asking for help. The momentary hesitation was all Maya needed. She tripped, falling to her knees, sobbing. The display was so perfectly pitched, so utterly convincing, that it created a crack in their professional discipline. They saw a victim, not a threat. While two of them cautiously approached, the others remained focused on the building. That was their mistake. They had a mission profile, and this didn't fit. As the first guard reached down to help her up, Maya moved. Her hand shot out, grabbing his rifle, twisting it, using the barrel as a lever. At the same time, her other hand slammed into his throat. He went down, gagging. Croft had already engaged the second man, his movements a brutal, efficient ballet. It was over in seconds. 2 men down, their radios and weapons now in their possession. They didn't kill them. They disabled them, melting back into the shadows before the rest of the team even realized the perimeter had been breached. They moved through the backyards of Havenwood, silent specters in a sleeping town. They reached the back of the diner. Maya's hand went directly to the loose brick. The key was there, cold and solid in her palm. They slipped inside, the familiar smell of stale coffee and baked goods, a surreal comfort. In the quiet darkness of the diner kitchen, they finally stopped. Adrenaline still coursed through them. "You never told me you were a SEAL," Maya said, her voice low as she checked the captured rifle. "You never told me you could weaponize a hardware store," Croft countered. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a target or a ghost, but as an equal. Evan Reed, my friend. He wasn't just my teammate. He was the one who recruited me. He saw something in me when I was just a stupid kid with a chip on my shoulder. He saved my life more than once. I owe him. The man who sent them, Maya said, her focus absolute. Who is he? Marcus Thorne, Croft said, the name tasting like poison. CIO of Aegis Defense. He's a major player in the private military world. He used a black ops budget to sanction the hit on Finch, who was his business rival. He hired you through a cutout organization he secretly controls. Then he framed Evan to take the fall and sever any connection back to him. Maya froze, her hands still on the rifle. What cutout organization? A ghost unit, no official name. Their operatives use origami as a calling card, a crane. The blood drained from Maya's face. The origami crane Croft had left on the counter wasn't a signal that Echt knew. It was a test. He was checking to see if she would recognize the signature of the very people who had hired her, the people she had been running from. Thorne is cleaning house, Croft continued. He has a major deal pending, merging his company with a European conglomerate, the kind of deal that comes with intense international scrutiny. He can't afford any loose ends. Not Evan. And not you. A cold, clear rage began to build in Maya's chest. For 5 years, she had lived in fear, believing she was a loose cannon, a murderer hiding from justice. But she wasn't the villain in this story. She was just another loose end, a tool to be discarded, and Marcus Thorne had just tried to discard her. The gun is still in the apartment, she said, her voice flat and dangerous. It's the only proof. Proof you pulled the trigger, maybe, Croft said, but it doesn't connect Thorne to the hit or the frame-up. We need more. Maya's mind was already working, connecting disparate pieces of information she had held for years. The payment for the Finch job. It was deposited into a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, a ghost account. I never touched it, but I memorized the number. It was part of my protocol. Croft's eyes lit up. If we can trace the source of that deposit, if it leads back to a company Thorne controls. It's not enough, Maya interrupted. We need to prove he ordered the frame-up. We need to prove he sent those men tonight. She thought back to her original mission briefing, a string of encrypted data she had long since wiped. But operatives like her were trained to remember everything. Details, numbers, codes. Most of it was chaff, designed to be meaningless. But sometimes there was a string of alphanumeric characters in the mission file, she said slowly, dredging the memory from the depths of her mind. A validation key. I thought it was just a file signifier. It could be a decryption key, Croft breathed, understanding dawning. A key to a secure server, a deep archive. If there's a record of the order, it would be there. They had a plan, but they were in a diner kitchen with 2 captured rifles and a town full of assassins looking for them. They needed a secure location, a powerful computer, and a link to the outside world. They needed help. There's only one person in this town we can trust, Maya said, her eyes meeting Croft's, and he's going to hate this. Sheriff Brody's house was a small, neat ranch at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. A single light burned in the living room. Maya and Croft approached from the back, moving through the manicured lawns of his neighbors like wraiths. They didn't knock. Maya picked the lock on the back door in under 15 seconds. They found Brody asleep in his armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him, his television playing a black-and-white movie on low volume. His service weapon lay on the coffee table. Croft gently took the weapon as Maya knelt in front of the armchair. "Sheriff," she whispered. Brody came awake instantly, his years of police training overriding the fog of sleep and whiskey. His eyes went from Maya to Croft, to the empty spot on his coffee table, and then to the rifle Croft held. He didn't panic. He just got very, very still. "Maya," he said, his voice a low rumble of confusion and betrayal. "You have a lot of explaining to do." For the next 20 minutes, in the quiet of Brody's living room, they told him everything. The assassination, the frame-up, Marcus Thorne, the cleaners who had leveled her apartment. They laid out the ghost accounts and the encryption keys. It was a story so far beyond the scope of Havenwood's usual troubles that it sounded like madness. Brody listened, his face an unreadable mask. When they were finished, he was silent for a full minute. "I ran your prints when you first came to town, Maya," he said finally. "They came back clean. Too clean. I always knew there was something you were hiding. I just never imagined it was this." He looked from her to Croft. "You brought a war to my town." "It was already here," Maya said quietly. "I just didn't know it." Brody stood and walked to his window, peering out into the silent street. "Those men, they won't stop until they find you. They'll tear this town apart." He turned back, his decision made. "My office has a secure server, connected to the state and federal mainframes. It's not the best, but it's shielded, and it's the only chance you've got." The sheriff's station was a small brick building in the center of town. Brody drove them in his personal truck, covering them with a blanket in the back. He bluffed his way through the perimeter Thorne's men had set up, his sheriff's badge and a tirade about a drunken disorderly at the local bar getting him through without a search. Inside the station, under the flat fluorescent lights, the final phase of their plan began. Brody stood guard at the door, while Croft used the sheriff's computer to contact a trusted source he had in the intelligence community, a data analyst who owed him a life debt. Maya stood over his shoulder, rattling off the long, complex ghost account number from memory. Croft typed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "My source is in," he murmured. "He's tracing the deposit." The screen filled with lines of code, shell corporations, offshore banks, a dizzying web of transactions designed to be untraceable. But Croft's source was a master. He peeled back the layers one by one. 10 minutes stretched into 30. "He's found it," Croft said, his voice tight with anticipation. The original transfer came from a holding company called North Star Acquisitions. "Never heard of it," Brody said from the door. "It's a subsidiary of a subsidiary," Croft said, reading from the screen. "But its parent company is Aegis Defense." He looked at Maya. "We've got him. We can prove Thorne paid for the hit." "Now for the order," Maya said. She recited the alphanumeric string, the validation key she had held in her memory for 5 years. Croft relayed it to his source. "He's using it to access a DoD deep archive server. It's heavily encrypted. He says it might take—" A single file icon appeared on the screen. It was an audio file, encrypted, but the key had worked. Croft's source downloaded it, stripped the final layer of security, and sent it through. Croft clicked play. A voice filled the small office, crisp and cold and utterly confident. It was Marcus Thorne. "Commander Reed is a liability. The official story is that he was Rosin's accomplice. Make it stick. Bury him so deep his own mother won't remember his name. As for the asset, the ghost who made the shot, her contract is terminated. Scrub her. I want every trace of her existence erased, permanently." Silence descended on the room. It was the smoking gun, the final, undeniable proof. They had him. "He's giving a keynote address tomorrow night," Croft said, his face grim. "At the Global Security Summit in D.C. He'll be surrounded by the most powerful people in the defense world. He'll feel completely untouchable." Then that's where we'll take him down, Maya said. Her voice held no fear, only the chilling certainty of a promise about to be kept. The ballroom of the Omni Shoreham Hotel was a sea of dark suits and quiet power. On stage, Marcus Thorne stood at a podium, bathed in a spotlight, the picture of corporate authority. He spoke of integrity, of the solemn duty of the defense industry, of a safer world built on the bedrock of Aegis Defense's technology. The audience of generals, politicians, and CEOs listened with rapt attention. He was at the absolute peak of his power. He never saw the two ghosts who slipped into the AV booth at the back of the room. A waitress uniform and a confident walk had gotten Maya through the hotel's service corridors. A forged all-access pass, and Croft's innate ability to project authority had gotten him past the security at the booth door. The technician inside didn't even have time to cry out. As Thorne reached the crescendo of his speech, speaking of unwavering commitment to the truth, Croft took control of the booth systems. "It's time," he said to Maya. She nodded, her heart a steady, slow drum. This wasn't for revenge. It was for Evan Reed. It was for Daniel Rosen. It was for the 5 years she had spent in a prison of her own making. On the massive screen behind Thorne, the Aegis Defense logo dissolved. It was replaced by a high-resolution, 3D rotating image of a custom Sig Sauer P-126, the gun. A murmur went through the crowd. Thorne faltered for a second, confused but tried to press on. The image on the screen changed again, showing the official, buried ballistics report from the Alistair Finch assassination. The unique markings on the shell casings highlighted in red, a perfect match to the gun. Panic began to flicker in Thorne's eyes. He gestured frantically to the side of the stage, but his security team was frozen, unsure of what was happening. Next, a complex financial flowchart filled the screen. It started with a box labeled Aegis Defense Slush Fund, and through a dizzying maze of shell companies, it ended at a single numbered Cayman Islands bank account with the words "Payment for Finch Asset" emblazoned below it. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were standing up, pulling out their phones. Thorne's face was ashen. He tapped the microphone, trying to speak, but no words came out. And then, the final piece of evidence. The ballroom's powerful sound system, which seconds before had been amplifying Thorne's voice, now broadcast his own words, his own order, into the stunned silence. "Scrub her. I want every trace of her existence erased, permanently." The audio file ended. For a single, breathless moment, the only sound was the hum of the hotel's air conditioning. Then, the back doors of the ballroom burst open, and a team of FBI agents, acting on an official tip from a small-town sheriff in Havenwood, moved toward the stage. Marcus Thorne stood frozen in the spotlight, exposed, ruined, his empire of lies collapsing around him in real time. He looked out at the sea of faces, and in the shadows at the back of the room, he thought he saw her. A woman with a calm, steady gaze, a ghost he had tried and failed to erase. Then she was gone. 1 year later, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the still waters of a lake nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Maya sat on the edge of a wooden dock, her bare feet dangling just above the surface. She was no longer hiding. Her posture was relaxed, her face open and peaceful. A car crunched on the gravel driveway, and a few minutes later, 2 men walked down the path toward her. Julian Croft, and a man with the same grey eyes, though his were etched with a history of pain and resilience. Evan Reed. "Maya," Reed said, his voice quiet but firm. "I wanted to thank you in person. You gave me my life back." "You never owed anyone that debt," she replied, her smile genuine. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun dip toward the mountains. Marcus Thorne was serving consecutive life sentences in a federal supermax prison. Aegis Defense had been broken up and sold for parts. "We're starting something new," Croft said, breaking the silence. "Evan and I, a private firm. We find people like us. People who've been erased, buried by the system. We give them a voice. We give them a chance to come home." He looked at her, his question unspoken but clear. "There's a place for you, if you want it." Maya looked out at the water. For 5 years she had been a ghost, defined only by a past she was running from. She had served coffee and hidden her secrets, believing that to be invisible was to be safe. But safety wasn't about being unseen. It was about being known, truly known, and choosing to stand in the light anyway. She turned back to them, the last rays of sun catching in her hair, and for the first time in a very long time, she looked like a woman who knew exactly who she was. "I'll think about it," she said, and the smile that reached her eyes was brighter than the setting sun.